Listen only mode.
Hey, good evening, folks. This is Chris Walker with evangelismcoach.org. I'm very glad that you're choosing to spend the next 45 minutes to maybe an hour with me to learn a little bit about evangelism strategies for 2012. I hope that you all are able to hear me okay. It appears that my microphone is working. If you can, go into the little Q&A section on your dashboard there and type in if you can hear me or not, and I'll be able to see that up on my screen. So if a few of you would just fire away and let me know that you can hear me, I would be grateful. And yep, coming in. Thank you all for letting me know. All right, fantastic. You'll want to make sure that you've got a pen and a paper. I have a tendency to talk fast, particularly on themes and subjects that I happen to be excited about, so it may seem that this presentation will fly by pretty quickly. A replay will be available to you. I will also make some slides available to you afterwards in case there are things that fly off the screen faster than you can keep up with it, but that's okay. Along the way, we'll have a chance for a little bit of Q&A, a little bit of interaction through the question and answer screen. That would be fantastic. That's where we're going to be doing that. And we had over 300 people register for this webinar from at least 16 different nations that I could count on the list. So the internet gives us the ability to have a truly global community. It's all part of the fun for me of being able to conduct a little seminar in this particular format. I'm really excited about what I want to share with you this evening. And before I get going, let me go ahead and pray for our time together. Lord, I ask that you would indeed allow us to learn one from another as we go through this work tonight, because ultimately we want to help people in our communities find a relationship with you and begin serving in your kingdom. Lord, I pray that you would use this time to challenge our churches to be involved in the work of evangelism wherever we are based. For it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen. Well, thank you all for coming through, and let me real briefly kind of give you a rundown as to where we are going tonight. And I promise that I'll give you a lot of good stuff, particularly stuff that you can put right into practice in the not too distant future. Most of all, I think a lot of what I'm going to give you is going to be great for conversational starters among your teams. And that is really what I hope to get out of this, that over the next few days your teams will be talking about how to implement some of this stuff or discern a little bit more about what out of this you can actually implement this. And so I hope to give you some possible steps along the way, all in about 60 minutes with some time for some Q&A. I will let you know that I do offer in a service, and so I will make an offer at the very end. I just wanted to give you a heads up that that will come. And I don't want you to invest in that offer unless I actually fulfill my promise today, which is to give you some implementable strategies and directions. Does that sound fair? I hope it sounds fair. If it sounds fair to you, go ahead and type, yeah, it sounds fair, or something in the Q&A box, and let me know if that sounds like a good fair. Yep, sounds good. I say yep, I see okay, sounds fair, sure. Yes, fair, all that stuff. Great. Well, let's get into this. And first off, let me just tell you a little bit about something that could happen. There's a church plant that I've been working with during this past year, and they have about 20 people, and they decided to go the direct mail route in order to raise awareness in the church that their community existed. They spent several thousands of dollars on that direct mail campaign and had very little results. Nobody came to their church, or if somebody did come to their church, they certainly didn't stay. But what they did is that they changed strategies to something that fit for their particular context. And I worked with them over the course of 4 months for that, and the end result is that they picked up 3 baptisms of new believers within the next 6 months, and these new believers are now connected members into the local church. And the other people who are outside of that training program that I was working with them on, there are now more people who are wanting to get involved because they begin to see that evangelism is actually very doable and not the scary thing that perhaps many of them thought it could. So this was simply with a tweak in strategy. This church is finding new impact in its local community. I'll tell you briefly about my own church. I work with another pastor, and he is kind of our lead planter. Both of us have no financial backing. We are both transplants from another culture. We don't have a worship team. We rent a hotel room. And so we've got a lot of things that are going against us in terms of growing a church from scratch, but over the last 2 years we've had some intentional planning with strategy, and we have grown from 4 of us, which is the pastor's family and my family, to over 70 in the past 2 years. and we celebrated 18 baptisms last year, and we still don't have a worship team. We actually sing with YouTube videos with the lyrics up on the wall. And so even though we miss all of the whiz-bang that a lot of churches are after, the fact is that we have some intentional evangelism strategies, and the relational warmth of our people overcomes a lot of shortcomings. And so we're really excited with what God has been doing with our church here in the last 2 years. That's me off to the left in the photo, together with our pastor on the right, with one of our baptismal candidates there in the center. Now, over the years, I've been involved in evangelism training and doing evangelism training for many years. I was a member of an evangelism committee for the Presbytery. I happen to be ordained in the Presbyterian Church, USA. So I was a member of the Presbytery's Evangelism Committee, where I started giving workshops in local churches. I've also been involved in 2 church plants, as well as a lot of cross-cultural mission trips into Latin America, as well as giving workshops on evangelism in 9 different countries over the last 10 years. In the course of all of my church life, up on the screen, you can read them yourself. There are a lot of different strategies that I have tried in the past. You can read them. I'm not going to read the list for you. But it really goes to show that I've had my hands in lots of different strategies, lots of different approaches. I've got to see a lot of them from the inside. I've got to experience them on a personal level. But it kind of gives you a feel that I've got some ideas that I really want to bring to you tonight that you can then start putting into place. But before I get into the ideas, I want to give a couple of caveats. Whenever it comes to talking about strategies, particularly for those of you who filled out the survey earlier before you got on board, a couple of caveats I just want to bring to the table. Number one, I am thoroughly convinced that people need to have a relationship with Jesus Christ, and that is part of what motivates me and the ministry that I do at evangelismcoach.org. And also, I am completely convinced in God's sovereignty. And what that means when it comes to evangelism strategies is that God is more sovereign than our ability to get it wrong, and God is more sovereign over our ability and over our plans. And I'll touch a little bit more about that. So as we talk about strategies and plans, none of it is to deny God's sovereignty, but to recognize really that our plans are subject to change to the leading of the Holy Spirit. One of the things that I saw in many of the different comments that were in those surveys was an interest in having the strategy or a template for a strategy to follow, or the best strategy to do this, or the best strategy to do that. Well, you can see up on the screen that the reality is that there is no the best strategy, nor is there a template to follow. What may work in rural Indiana may not work in Manila, Philippines. What may work in urban South Carolina may not work in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It's really kind of hard to point out to you the best, because then everybody would do it. And your best ways may not work elsewhere. Yeah, and that's just a reality, and I think most of you know that, but I wanted to bring that out and get that cleared up before we go on tonight. And then finally, the whole idea that specific callings lead to ministry expressions. Your pastor, your church may be called to work with the homeless, and so your evangelism methodologies are going to be aimed in that particular direction. Others of you have particular callings to deal with human trafficking or to deal with the sexual brokenness in your community. And your ministry expressions and evangelism training expressions are going to be based into that particular calling. So it is kind of hard to say that there is one particular best strategy. But the reality is I want to take a look tonight at kind of a 50,000-foot view of where you can start thinking about some of the strategies and how they may apply in your local context. So are you ready to talk some strategy tonight? I hope you are, because I'm getting ready to plug into it, jump into it, full steam ahead. And I'm really excited about this. More so because I can think of the potential impact that our churches can have, just the churches that are on this call, in so many different places around the world. And we do see a little bit of that there are some examples of some potential evangelism strategies in Scripture. The Matthew chapter 9 verse 35 through chapter 10 verse 20 gives us a couple insights into a strategy that Jesus used. He told his disciples to pray for the harvest and then go to the lost sheep of Israel, preach this message, heal the sick, don't take this, take that. So he gives them a little bit of strategy, and they go out and they implement it. So there is a place for strategy. We see in Acts 1:8 the concentric circles of Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, up to the utter ends of the earth. And we see that that's kind of a strategy that happens throughout the book of Acts as the gospel goes from point A to point B. One of the questions that has come back to me is that are numbers really necessary? And I do believe that possible numbers are absolutely necessary for the simple reason that putting numbers on goals really provides some concrete direction, and those goals really then set the direction for planning. If you want to grow by 5 families in your church, it's going to impact how your hospitality ministry works. It's going to impact your building facilities. It's going to impact your evangelism methodologies. It's going to do all sorts of things. So by putting a particular number on it, then it kind of brings some concreteness to the plans. And your goals, as you step into them with your strategies, your goals should be measurable, and it's helpful to somewhat have a target for that. But in the midst of it all, we've got to recognize the sovereignty of God to guide, shape, and rearrange the goals and plans and strategies that we set. And we see that when Paul tries to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not let him. So this is the story that I'm going to kind of use as we walk through this to kind of map through the 3 different areas, 3 different interconnected directions when it comes to evangelism strategies in the local church. Just like the blades of a propeller are all necessary to work together in order to advance the boat to go forward, I think that these 3 interconnected areas are very helpful for us to think about when it comes to evangelism strategy. So the first area that I will be focusing on this evening is that of personal evangelism, in training up of people who are active in sharing their faith, motivating your members of the congregation to be involved in those personal faith-sharing conversations. This really gets into how to prepare people to share their faith on a one-to-one basis, ways to think through specifically how do you equip people to go from being extremely afraid to being confident communicators of their faith. And this is where some intentional training comes into place, as well as practical experience. You'll want to be able to think through how to provide some training curriculum or some training courses to help them with that, and then provide ways to actually give them a chance to experience the sharing of their faith. Now, many of you are probably familiar with Bill Hybels' book and Becoming a Contagious Christian, and in there he talks about the different evangelism styles: confrontational, analytical, storytelling, relational, invitational, and servant. What I've seen recently is to think particularly in terms of what is that person's style, or maybe even what is your congregation's style, and then choose a curriculum that would match it. You can see there yourself on the screen, there's all sorts of different curriculum examples. On the first line is Way of the Master, which is Ray Comfort's material using the 10 Commandments. EE is Evangelism Explosion. You got the various different gospel tracks like Steps to Peace with God, 4 Spiritual Laws, Roman Road. And that kind of fits those who are more in that confrontational style where they're just out there ready to talk to anybody at the drop of a hat. And then there's other curriculums that would fit a particular style. Jesus Among Other Gods is a course that is designed around apologetics by Ravi Zacharias, and that kind of really goes after the thinkers. For storytellers, you've got the 3-story curriculum as well as the NET. In the relational evangelism category, you have the Just Walk Across the Room course, or maybe even the Alpha course, or the training for the Alpha course. And then in the invitational, you've got various different sermon series and events that are designed to attract people into your local church so that people are willing to invite their friends into the local church. And then you've also got the servant evangelism approach that was really championed by Steve Sjogren. What is really important, I think, to see here is that if you kind of know what is the dominant style of your people who are interested in studying evangelism or your church, you want to make sure that you match up the right curriculum to them. If you've got somebody who is very invitational, it's going to be very hard for them to go out and and use the Way of the Master material because it just doesn't fit them, much like Saul's armor did not fit David. If you have someone who is more of the storytelling, which is like, I was blind, now I see. I was not a Christian, now I am. I've been on drugs, now I'm not. If you've got somebody who can tell their story very well, well, they may not be able to match the style of apologetics such as what Ravi Zacharias would do, or C.S. Lewis, or Josh McDowell, or some of those other things. So you want to begin to think through what curriculum might go with the people that you have in your particular congregation. And this is one area of study. I've also got my own curriculum that I use. I put a little 5-CD set together at fearfreeevangelism.com. Many of you who are familiar with my stuff know that it's out there. Some of you have heard that seminar live. And I just discovered today on it that I actually left a coupon code out there for $10 off if that interests you. And that code is seminar. Just use that at the website if you want to get it. But that's not what I'm pitching today. Really, what that particular course is kind of a hybrid of an evangelism methodology. It's based on relational stuff, but it also works in a contact environment where you're having a conversation between strangers, as well as more of that missional context, like maybe you're having a missional community over at your house. And it is a way of learning how to observe spiritual thirst so that you can have those very significant conversations that lead to those faith-sharing conversations. And that's something that I've put together, and I was just teaching a lot of that recently here in Nicaragua last week, so I'm a little bit jazzed about it at the moment. So here are some steps in the personal evangelism direction, is to think about researching the various curriculums that are out there and pick one. Now, to help short-circuit that process, let me give you a book recommendation. It's not on the screen, but I want you to write this down. The book recommendation is by Jeffrey Johnson, and it is called Got Style, G-O-T-S-T-Y-L-E, on personality-based evangelism. You can pick it up at Amazon. You can pick it up at any Christian bookstore whatsoever. For me, this is one of the key books that I read, I think, 2010. This was a book that I read in 2010. I've got a webinar with Jeff Johnson on my website, and the big insight into this book is that he goes through all 6 of those curriculums and then talks about the various strengths and weaknesses of each style and why certain curriculum fits a whole lot better. So that book is called Got Style, and that will help you with the research and picking a curriculum that you can possibly use here in 2012. Another possible step that you can take is to actually form a group of people. Instead of trying to get your whole church to do it, pick a handful of people who are passionate about evangelism. And, if you're a pastor or you're a ministry team leader, you can pull them aside and really work with them as a group. And I believe that when people see what's going on there, there's going to be a little bit of a curiosity factor in order to be able to share that motive for personal evangelism. And then above all, I think it's important to debrief your experiences. Whenever you have a chance to have a spiritual conversation, it's important to reflect on that conversation so that you can learn from it. It has become an unconscious habit for me. It's something that I do almost every time I have a faith-sharing conversation with somebody, is that I reflect on it. How did that conversation come to pass? How did I see that conversation? How did the Lord open the doors? What would I have done differently if I could do it all over again? But those are some steps that come out of practical experience. And when people who are involved in my training programs or coaching programs, this is a key element of it, is to help them think through so that they can learn from every conversational experience. So those are some possible strategy steps. Now, here's an example of how those strategy steps might work out when it comes to a relational evangelism model. First off, quit going to Bible studies all the time so that you can start building relationships with unchurched people. But here are some ways that you can put some specific action steps to the plans. That, okay, this year I want to make sure that I build 3 new relationships with people. Or maybe you need to take an inventory of relationships that you have and see if you actually have any non-Christian friends. And if you don't, what are the action steps that you need to take in order to increase that? Maybe you'll want to devise a prayer list for at least 6 people that you want to know to come to know the Lord, and over the next 30, 60, 90 days, make it a point to pray for them on a regular basis. Something that I found in my travels and seminars is that people think they know the gospel presentation, but when it comes time to actually share it on the spur of the moment, they don't know what that is. They don't know how to do it. And so make a goal to learn a particular gospel presentation. That may be the Romans Road. It may be the Steps to Peace with God. It may be True Story. There's lots of different versions of the gospel that are out there. And we can save the theological debates over those gospel presentations for later. But the idea here is to pick one and master it so that you can use it when it comes time to actually have those conversations. How some of these goals work out when it comes to kind of you as an individual person. I've got a list there on the screen. You can read the list for yourself. I'm not going to read them all to you. But these are just a sample of some possible goals as to what it might mean to keep your evangelism passion high. If some measurable goals that you can make, some measurable goals that you can put into practice in order to be able to live out a lifestyle of evangelism and work at that area of personal evangelism. You can read all of those and see what they are, but those are some possible directions. It all comes down to, yes, I want to reach out to 5 people to come to know the Lord. And that has consequences, that kind of decision does. And these are some of those personal, actionable steps that you can start writing out. Now, even more so when it comes to pastors in particular, and if you're a pastor on the line tonight, I really want to talk to you just real briefly with this slide. And you can see here the role of the pastor in personal evangelism. This is where, pastor, you need to work at growing your own personal skills and comfort factor in evangelism. And I do some personalized coaching for pastors in that particular direction. But also, not only are you growing in your skills, but you are leading your staff and or other leaders in their growth as in personal evangelism. In your sermons, you're talking about the community. You're praying for the community. People catch you praying for the community, but also in your own private devotional life, you're praying for the community and for the people in that community who don't know Jesus. You're working at building your own authentic relationships. Again, from the seminars that I've done in the United States over the last few years, it's become clear to me that a lot of pastors, at least in the groups that I get in front of, often realize that they don't have a lot of friends outside of the Christian community. And so as pastors, they've got to be very active in building those relationships. I know there are pastors that are out there, they've got unchurched friends, but a lot of the groups that I wind up speaking to, it's true that the pastors have been in the churches for so long, they don't have a whole lot of non-Christian friends left. And then, pastors, you can also take the decision to include the gospel presentation in more sermons. And so if you want to think about your personal evangelism goals, think about ways that you can improve how do you communicate the gospel in your sermons. And then also there's the personal coaching, which I mentioned, but that's not what I'm offering tonight. And the other thing that I have found is that when pastors are involved in personal evangelism and it is oozing out of their pores, it is quite often that other people around them will start getting motivated. One of the key questions that came in the survey this week, for those of you who filled out the survey before coming online, a predominant question is, how do we get unmotivated people to be motivated in evangelism? I'll tell you from my own experience. When I was preaching every Sunday, the evangelism stories were simply oozing out of my sermons. Making a gospel invitation was often in my sermons. And it didn't take long before other people started sharing with me their stories of conversations that they were having with people. In the church that I just finished a 4-month training process with, what they wound up doing is that particular small group of people who participated with me was having such noticeable success that other people were wanting to say, if you can do it, I can do it too. And what it comes down to is this kind of leadership. It is being involved in evangelism yourself so that it oozes out of your pores, and this helps to motivate other people. Now, so far, I've only focused on the personal evangelism blade and the propeller. So, I hope that this is the kind of information that you're looking for tonight. I think I realize it's a whole lot. I realize that it's a brain dump. But it is enough really to get the conversation started with personal email. And so if this is kind of information that you're looking for, say so in the little question box. Let me see that kind of run off the screen, that this has been very helpful. So far, so good. Are some of the comments that I'm getting in. Success. This is great stuff. Yes, yay. All right, good. I'm glad to know that y'all are still with me. Bring it on, someone adds. Enjoying it. Bring it on. So, okay. All right. Whew. I'm glad I know that I'm touching along in the right spots. Very helpful information. So let's come back to this particular metaphor. Spend some time talking about the implications for evangelism strategies with regards to personal evangelism. In this next section, I want to move into the worship experience. This is kind of the whole come and see bit, and this is really about for most churches, it's the Sunday worship experience. It is the primary experience where you're trying to get people to come to become part of your local community, your local church community. For those of you that are kind of in the house church movement, I may kind of not be really addressing some of the issues in that particular thing, but I'm really thinking of kind of the more traditional model that most of us have seen and perhaps participated in, where people are coming to the gathered church on a Sunday. And so in this particular evangelistic experience, we're looking at the whole process of getting people into your church and connecting people to your fellowship so that they are free to serve in the world. This is really the attractional part. This is where a lot of the church growth teaching in the past 20 years has centered itself. And I have a brief little allergy issue, so every now and then when I take a long pause, you can imagine. But there are various different ways to measure some of the goals with regards to the worship experience. Do you want to measure the number of conversion experiences? Do you want to measure the number of adult baptisms? Do you want to measure the number of conversations that people are having with church people? You can measure how many people are bringing others. You can measure your improvement in keeping your first-time guests. You can measure an X% of increase in small group and class attendance, X number of evangelistic outreaches for the year. You can talk about ways that you could be involved in praying for the unchurched, all that stuff. There's various different ways to measure, and the idea of tonight's discussion is to at least raise the topic, and your team will have to figure out, okay, what is it that you want to measure? But no matter, and so let me give you just an example. Maybe you'll want to have 10 adult baptisms. Maybe you want to have 20 new believers who are serving and connected into your church. Or maybe you just want a 20% increase in worship attendance, recognizing that people, some become believers along the way, and others are transfers from another community, whether that's a local community or they've moved from wherever they are, and so you're just focused on worship attendance. Whatever it is that you are comfortable measuring, you'll want to put a number on it because it has implications for everything else. I was just with a ministry that is planning on doubling in 3.5 years, and then they want to double again. And so that has implications on staff, that has implications on facilities, that has implications on training programs. But it all started because they put a measurable number to help set their goal. So it has space implications. It even has support implications. I've put up there on the screen, all of whatever your target is, it's got implications for, how are you going to train people in personal evangelism to reach that goal? How are you going to prepare your hospitality ministries on Sunday in order to receive the guests that become part of your church? How can you improve your children's ministry so that it doesn't become a deterrent to families, or how can you revitalize that if that is what is needed? It also has implications for facilities. I mean, imagine for some of your churches, you're 80% full already, and so if you want to grow another 20%, that's going to max out all the available seats. And if you remember, one of the basic principles of space is that at 80% you're full. If you want to grow your congregation, so that you add another 20% of people, you're going to wind up busting at the seams, and so that's going to have facility questions. It's going to wind up leading you down the thought of planning a second site, second service, or something along those lines. So you can see that there are some implications to setting some particular goals. Maybe think in terms of the connection process at your church. There's all sorts of things that the church will have to work at to get that repeat visit, which may include new member receptions and new member classes, and where can a new member plug in quickly over the course of the next several weeks so that they may be able to find a place to serve. You'll want to spend some time thinking about your connection process, and that leads to all sorts of goal setting and tweaks and reviews and action steps out of that. But not only in terms of the connection process, but if you want to grow your worship attendance, there's also marketing implications for marketing, for Facebook pages, website, communication pieces, how to generate positive social network, positive word of mouth throughout the social networks, and realize the word of mouth is not just something that's verbal anymore. With things like Facebook and Twitter, people are reporting their experiences. Some of you who read my Facebook feed know that I share some of the comments that get made, or some of you who read my blog know that I share some observations that people have about their experiences at churches. And you want to make sure that you want to be focused on creating such an experience that people will talk about what an awesome experience it was to be at your church. Or maybe they'll send pastor a note about what a wonderful experience it was to be there that Sunday. Or maybe they'll tell their friends that it was awesome, they got to come with them next time. And you know, there's all sorts of things. In our particular church, we actually have no marketing budget. We actually just use email, BlackBerry Messenger, and Facebook to kind of communicate publicity-wise. But then we also have a very relational congregation, and they tend to make friends easy with a lot of people. So most of it is the word of mouth through social networks is kind of how our church is really helping to grow. But if you want to reach 10 new people or have 10 adult baptisms, you've got to be thinking some strategically along those lines. But then there's also implications with regards to the worship service itself. Pastors, you want to think about particular sermon series to help you plan. So if you've got something coming up for Easter, what's your sermon series leading up to Easter? It can be exegetical. It can be biblical based. It doesn't have to be topical. And then, of course, you got your Easter sermon. But then what is your series after the Easter sermon so that it gives reason for people to come back? And pastors, as you're thinking about your worship, what are some different ways that you can make sure that the gospel message is actually connected with what it is that you're teaching? One of the things that I admire about Dr. Charles Stanley is that I remember, growing up, as I would listen to, growing up in Christ, after I became a Christian, I would listen to his sermons. He was very formative in my life. And it always seemed that he could take whatever passage that he was preaching on and somehow connect it, even by one or two sentences, to the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was an amazing thing for me to watch that for him. So let's say, for example, that you do have that goal of 10 baptisms. You've got the Easter services coming up, and you know that you want to have 10 adult baptisms. So think backwards from there. It's going to impact your Easter sermon planning. It's going to impact your post-Easter sermon series. And then you've got to start thinking through, well, how will we find those people to come? How will we motivate the invitations? How will we facilitate the invitations? What are the marketing pieces that we'll have to help that? How will we use our Facebook page? Are we actually ready to welcome and receive the visitors, which gets into all those hospitality issues? Now, in our particular church, I just want to tell you a story. There is a family that was thinking about moving 1,700 miles away. And as a result of the hospitality and the friendship that she built within a couple of weeks of visiting our church, as a family, they have made the decision to actually stay and not move. Friends, that's the power of hospitality. That's the power of a warm welcome. It has affected the destiny of this particular family. And this particular family has actually become, is actually growing up to be one of those key servants in our small church. And so, thinking through all of these things, you see how your goals have consequences. Do you have space for that? Do you have the physical space for it? Are you prepared to receive it, et cetera, et cetera? Because out of those visitors, some will come back. You'll have the ability to connect several of them into your congregation, some of whom may become believers along the way. When it also will affect your hospitality issues, as I've mentioned. And so here are some possible hospitality steps. And for those of you who are familiar with my blog, you know that I write probably half my stuff on issues related to church hospitality. And so these are some practical steps that you can begin to launch. You can think about launching a greeters ministry. And here in January, I get a lot of traffic from people who are interested in launching a greeters ministry from the church. So that's why I've got a lot of stuff up there, and I've got that Church Greeters 101 book and the churchgreeterstraining.com website and all that kind of good stuff to help people launch the greeter ministry for their church. You might want to set up that welcome center. You might want to hold a new greeter training, or you might want to think about your process of connection cards, and you want to think about how can we make sure that we get at least 75% of the connection cards. I don't think you'll ever be able to get 100%, but you should be at least able to get a good 3/4 of them. So by simply thinking in terms of the worship element that you want to have 10 adult baptisms, it has a lot of consequences that then begin to help you brainstorm some of the various different strategy elements. Now, let me ask you this. Once again, I've kind of reached this this kind of second midpoint, and again, I hope that this information has been helpful so far. And so if it is, kind of fire away some comments and let me know if I'm still on target with the plan before I get into the until I get into the third area of the stuff. Now, thankfully, some of you are putting in some great questions that are in here. I will actually answer I will try to get to the questions at the very end of the stuff, and because some of them is not really quite into what it is that I'm trying to get at today, and so we'll move on here to the third part. You all are encouraging me. This information is helpful. Very good information. Thanks. Helpful. Great information. The hospitality info was good. I recognize one of my customers who's bought some stuff, and so that's a little plug that they've given me. Great information. Thank you. And some of you are saying I talk fast, and I do. Yep, I apologize for that. I do talk fast when I get a little bit excited. The slides are flying. I do agree with that. So I will make sure that the slides are available for you tomorrow. You'll get an email when you get access to the replay. And so let's go ahead and move on to kind of this third area. I'm not going to dwell too long on here because the number of strategies that are in this direction are just are just enormous, full of ideas. I mean, I've got PDFs on my laptop that have 100 ideas for this and 100 ideas for that, and Leadership Magazine or Leadership Network has got 100 ideas for this and all sorts of stuff. So we're going to at least talk a little bit about community engagement, because again, your evangelism goals are going to affect how you express ministry in your local community. And for me, here's where it begins. It begins with finding God's heart for your community. Your church is equipped to reach a particular need in your community. That's just part of an operating assumption that I bring to the table. And finding God's heart and God's calling for your church and in the community is something that's unique to every single church. Some churches are really focused on single adults. Others are focused on human trafficking. Others are focused on ministries to the homeless. Others are focused on education system. Others are focused on affordable housing. There's so many different ways, but it's a matter of recognizing the heart of the community, recognizing God's heart for the community that God has given to your church. And that, of course, gets into launching ministries to engage the community. But what is really important is that no matter what your ministry expression is as the church, you'll want to make sure that you're preparing your people to be intentional in looking for those conversations about their faith. And this is where it ties back into the personal evangelism training. When they build those relationships of trust and they're able to share their faith in a meaningful way, then people do wind up often getting connected with the local church, which, again, is part of why all three of these areas need to be worked on. I've talked with a lot of churches that do a lot of good in the neighborhood, but they forget to actually share the gospel along the way. The people come in, they do their duty, they do their task, but they do it with anonymous strangers and never see them again. They don't take the time to build relationships with them. And one of in my church before the one that I'm currently planting, we would make sure that for people who came in to visit with the food pantry, that we actually visited with them for a little bit. One of the podcasts that is on my website deals with a church of 20 members that visits with the people who come with the food pantry. When the people come to pick up their food, they sit and they visit with the people. They offer to pray with them. So you can find that in the podcast feed where at the Evangelism Coach website. Someone in the survey mentioned that my podcast feed seems out of date. I found that as a bug on my website when you pointed it out to me. In iTunes, my evangelismcoach.org podcast feed is up to date, but on my website it is not. So I've got to fix that little bug. Thanks for pointing that out to me. But the podcast is there. There's about 15 episodes or so on there. So then you've got some possible strategy steps as you think about different ministry expressions, such as vacation Bible schools, block parties, special events. This is where you're asking people to come to the church or come to a particular location and experience some of the church community. When you do, you want to make sure that you pray and watch, of course, watch for those particular spiritual conversations. We attended a vacation Bible school, and quite honestly, nobody from the church talked to us. They had fun with our kid, but not a single adult engaged us in conversation. And I think that is just wrong. That that is just cold. And you want to make sure that as you're doing your planning for all this event, to really drive home the point, look for those conversational opportunities that the Lord might give you. And that's where, again, personal evangelism training comes into play. My course comes into play at fearfreeevangelism.com, all of that to really help you be sensitive to some of that stuff. So that's some of the come and see side, and then there's the go and tell side where you're actually out in the community. You've got missional communities, you're taking prayer walks in the community, or you're developing or participating in ministries around particular issues. If you want a good example of a missional community, you can write down this website, missmartyshouse.com. Miss as in M-I-S-S, Marty, M-A-R-T-I, possessive, Marty's House. HOUSE.com or .org, I can't remember, Miss Marty's House. And you'll see an example of one of my friends who have a missional community in Richmond, Virginia. And along in that particular missional community, there's lots of chances for Marty and her husband Lewis to be involved in sharing their faith. It is really exciting for them to watch. Now let me try to put all this together as an example. I found an interesting suggested sample earlier today, and you can see it up there on the wall, depending on the size of your church, of maybe some particular outreach goals. As a particular way to start thinking about your evangelism strategy. And in terms of something that's reasonable for the size of your church, so you can quickly take a peek and kind of get an idea of maybe some actual concrete events and or some concrete action steps. And once you start putting numbers on things, as I mentioned, it has all sorts of implications for all three of these propeller blades, whether it be personal evangelism, community engagement, or the actual worship experience. Above all of that, just simply make sure that you've got people who are praying, and make sure that you yourself are praying, and you're not just simply like, oh, that's sure that you are busy covering all your and the difficulties of the audio. Let's see here. Hold on just a second. Let me check one thing. Back under the surface here. Can you guys hear me again? If you can hear me, go ahead and say yes, yes, yes into the... there we go. It's all fixed. No, I was not speaking in tongues, but those of you who have the gift of interpretation, yes, yes. Okay. All right, I'm back. With experiment, that you got everything in prayer. So, I make sure you tail in. Oh, I'm breaking up again. Oh, still breaking up. That must be a GoToWebinar issue and not me. Let's see if there's anything that I can do to fix that. Well, it's going to be a little sketchy here, I guess, for the next few minutes. But let's see if we can unsketch it. Sounds like I'm back. Don't worry, I'm not making fun of any Pentecostals. I hang around with a bunch of them. And others of you said, well, GoToWebinar can't keep up with how fast I'm talking. Oh, the fun of this. Well, you can see up on the screen, I hope, my particular thing. Have I, indeed delivered on kind of what I promised in the email? So I would give you 3 areas of directions in order to help you start planning, and then possible strategy steps in each area and implications, as well as indeed the 6 different styles and the matching studies. If you think I've accomplished all those goals, just fire off some yes in the comment box so that I know that I really accomplished what I was hoping to do. Yes, yes, great stuff, awesome stuff, delivered as promised, and all that kind of good stuff. Great, I'm glad that I got into it. Now let me just give you kind of the little pitch for the service. It's not going to apply to all of you, and I won't take long in doing it, but with it, I just wanted to make that available for you, and then I'll take some of the questions that have been. a possible next step. I've presented a whole lot of information for you. Some of your churches may be interested in a 4-month training program for your church, which includes a monthly phone call with me, personal evangelism track or hospitality track. You've got all sorts of handouts and resources that kind of go with it, as well as MP3s of every phone call that I can record. And the personal evangelism track, which is over 4 months, will provide a usable strategy for a small group that has been proven to really make a difference by some intentional planning and building some intentional relationships and how to look for some of those faith-sharing conversations. And in a group like this, you're accountable to actually implementing evangelism, because in the calls I will actually ask you who'd you talk to and have you tell me some stories. I'm not going to drill you, but as part of the learning experience, you've got to get out there and engage people in conversation. And in the course of doing that, it helps you to grow in personal skills, and it's really based on my conversational model that I teach in my Fear-Free Evangelism course. In the church hospitality track over the course of these 4 months, I'll help you to identify the unnecessary barriers that visitors bounce off of, give you some ways to find and recruit volunteers, and I even give you 12 different months of suggested action steps. If you're just getting started, I can at least give you a roadmap that you can follow for the next year, ways to conduct a hospitality audits and all that kind of good stuff. Now, the reality is 300 people registered for this phone call. About half of them attended, and I've only got room for 10 before I have to create a waiting list, and that's just a reality and a limit of my time over the next 4 months. And so if you think this offer applies to you, I'll just briefly tell you how it is. It's $125 a month for 4 months, and the first installment is due upon signing up. And it's pretty easy to sign up just by simply visiting the deal page at evangelismcoach.org. You can't find it unless you actually go to that /deal. And like I mentioned, I've got those 10 spots available. So that's evangelismcoach.org/deal. And why be involved in something like this? Really, I want to help you develop a particular action plan over the next 4 months that is geared for your congregation, to help you focus on particular evangelism practices in your particular area, and to help you think through your particular next step lists. I really like the fact that it's short term. It's just enough to get going so that you get off in the right direction. I don't require a whole year. I don't require a 2-year program. I don't even require a 3-year program, and I know some consultants who do. And this is really that great time of year to get started in that. And I try to make it as practical as possible. Those of you who have seen my other resources know that it's been the bag simple, really, in terms of some practice. That's probably the greatest feedback that I get greatest amount of feedback that I get in all of my stuff. And I'm available to your team one-to-one. And the fact is that books are great at giving you theory, but it's not often you get hold of the author themselves to actually go through some action steps. And so those are just some reasons why you might want to take advantage of it. And if you do, that's where it is, at evangelismcoach.org/deal. And then just to be sure, I don't want your money guarantee. Just lay it out there. The reality is, if it doesn't work for you, I'll just give you your money back, because I don't want it unless it's working for you. I don't want to get paid for it unless unless it's working. So, if you don't like the progress after the second call, we'll just cancel it, and I'll refund everything that you paid. And if after the first call we realize it's not a fit, I'll just go ahead and refund your first payment. No worries about that. I really want to focus on the churches that think that they can be helped by this particular solution, and so that's where you need to go in order to participate in it. And it's real simple, $125 a month for 4 months. So that's it for the pitch. But let me give you the opportunity to fire off some questions. We've got just a little bit of time. Wow, I actually did this in under 50 minutes. Maybe because I talked a little too fast. To try to address some of the questions that you may have with regards to evangelism strategies. Now, probably the best way to do this, I'll give you 2 particular ways. One is that if you do have a microphone hooked up to your computer, microphone and headset, and you'd like to ask a question of the group verbally, there is a raise your hand function in the GoToWebinar panel. And when you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and then you can talk into that. If you don't really have a microphone and a headset set up, it really isn't quite that workable. I've just had too many problems with feedback loops, et cetera, et cetera. So that's one way to raise questions, is to raise your hand if you've got the equipment to handle it. The other way to ask questions is to simply fire them off in the question box. And with that, there in the question box, we'll take some of the questions that come in. For those of you who feel the need to go ahead and leave, you're more than welcome to. I want to thank you for your time tonight. I want to thank you for joining me, and hopefully this information was indeed firing up some of the thought processes and the like in terms of really getting those wheels going to generate the ideas. If you're a creative type person, this is probably just way too much information and creating all sorts of dreams and ideas and all sorts of other things that you've got to go and work and actually trying to implement. And that's part of what the coaching or the training program for 4 months is, for me to help you do that. Now let me see if I can let me see if I can try to address some of the questions that come in. Since it's just me, I'll try to kind of filter the questions and try to put them in a couple of different orders. Number one, some questions about the slides and the recording and all that kind of good stuff. Briefly, the slides will be available tomorrow. Then the recording will also be available tomorrow, both an MP3 version and hopefully the video version. And that will come to you by email about 24 hours from now, so that it gives me a chance to put it up on the website to access. I'll keep it up there for a couple of days, and then in terms of the offer that I made here tonight, the reality is once I hit 10, I hit 10, and I'll have to go to a waiting list if needed. Don't know if it's needed, but if it is needed, I'll have to do that. So that covers the MP3s, that covers the slides and all that kind of good stuff. So in terms of, let's see here, in terms of will I be repeating this webinar anytime soon? Probably not. Not for a while anyway. But you'll have the chance to at least listen to the replay in a little bit. Let's try to get into some of the more practical questions that have come in with regards to evangelism strategies. Now, I've got so many questions on my screen. Let me see if I can just pick one here. Give me just a minute. One of the things that was very clear in the survey that many of you filled out before tonight was your disdain for door-to-door methodologies, door-to-door visitation, and the struggles that you've had with it and how people in your congregations don't like to do it. At least for this particular group of people that filled out the survey, it was hands down the most unliked version of evangelism methodologies that are out there. And I've trained congregations in door-to-door evangelism. I do think that it has a place, but I've got a twist on it. And in that, as opposed to going door-to-door to actually share the gospel, I actually encourage people to go to door-to-door and look for spiritual need and find ways to minister into that. The gospel sharing conversation can come later, and it often does. And that way you're not wasting your time for the spiritually hostile or the spiritually curious, but you're really looking for those who are spiritually thirsty. And if you can find enough people in the same area, then really you've got the opportunity to open up a new group of seekers who are really interested in seeking after the Lord. And so if door-to-door is part of your campaign, then maybe that is or part of your desire, then maybe that is part of a twist in order to be able to help other people to step into the joys of that kind of work. I've talked with churches that every Saturday they go out and they do door-to-door campaign, but for a lot of the participants it feels like a sales presentation either for the church or a sales presentation for Jesus. It's kind of that confrontational style with people, done by people who are in the relational style. And by tweaking up the model just a little bit of helping the people relate to one another, focusing on spiritual need, as well as maybe physical need, it kind of helps solve some of that issue. And that's kind of one of the implications as you think about personal evangelism training with church in terms of how the two might mix. Another question that I have here is how can we understand what evangelism style we are the most comfortable with? Again, let me refer you to the book that I mentioned earlier, and if you haven't written this down already, write it down again, and that would be the book Got Style, G-O-T-S-T-Y-L-E, Got Style. And in that, he's got a whole chapter on a personal assessment that is really aimed at helping you kind of see what your particular style is, and then he actually talks about how to use that assessment for churches, which is really one of the strengths of Jeff Johnson's book. And again, it's great stuff, full of statistics, by the way. For those of you who love numbers and citations, this is one of the most well-researched books that I've actually read in over a year or two. So it's really good stuff there. So in terms of understanding the evangelism style we are most comfortable with, I think that's kind of how you would that's a way that you can approach that particular question. I got some other questions with regards to how do we see it fitting into a church that adheres to a common lectionary. I'm not really sure. That's a question I'd love to have some follow-up conversations with you about. I guess that when it comes to sermon series and other things, there are probably some ways that you can actually use the lectionary around the given times and still communicate the richness of the gospel message. And then let's see here, some other questions that have come in. For churches located in business districts, do you recommend adopting a community? Again, there's so many questions that are aimed at specific strategies based on specific settings. And I think it'd be kind of hard to give a blanket statement as to one way or the other. Part of how I would answer a lot of the questions that are along these lines are really to spend time praying, asking God to give you some of that direction, some of that clarity as to what it is. One of the churches that I am with, or that I have worked with, is actually in a business community. It's right on the small town USA, right on the edge of residences, but also Main Street. And so, as a teaching staff or as a staff, what they have decided to do is actually spend time prayer walking their community, and they're actually getting to know all the different business owners in along Main Street and in the offshoots thereof. So they've walked into the various stores, they prayed with the store owners, and that is kind of getting that church out into the community and praying for its particular needs. But again, that's kind of a prayer-driven methodology that particular church is into. Another one asked about how they have an annual event in their town that draws over 10,000 people for the community, and at that event they provide a prayer tent with some gospel messages, entertainment, and what can they do to better turn this into an evangelism opportunity. Now, I just did a podcast with a pastor who did something similar up in New Hampshire for Christmas, where they were actually using the table to attract people to their Christmas services. So they would use the table to pray and give away literature. But the idea was to drive traffic to the Sunday or the Christmas worship experience, to the Christmas Eve worship experience as well as play. So they had ramped up their hospitality stuff. They had gotten their congregation involved in praying, and they had gotten in people. They had a comeback series, so that they had a sermon series to kick off here at the first of the year. And we had only talked up to that event, but I actually haven't talked with him yet since I was back from my mission trip to find out how it went and how they got people to come back. But in terms of people actually at that event, I come back to look for the people who are spiritually thirsty. If they come and they start talking to you about their spiritual need, you can turn that into an evangelism opportunity because it's one that God is bringing to you. You can spend some time praying that the Lord would bring you spiritually thirsty people who will start talking to you, and that will happen. And then, of course, helping people get connected with some of your church family. There's some action steps that you can start giving at that particular tent. I'm going to go just for a few more minutes here to try to address some of the questions that are still coming in. At this point, it doesn't look like anybody's got their hand raised to do a, no, I do see. I do see here a hand raised. So Clara, if you are with us, let's see. Nope. Whoop, where'd you go? I hit the wrong button. So let me see if I can find you again. This would be Clara. Let's see, Clara, where are you? Hopefully I didn't hang up Clara. Let's see. All right, Clara, are you there? Clara, can you hear me, or did I hang up on you? I guess I hung up on her. So if you have the opportunity to, if Clara, if you're able to come back on, just raise your hand again, and I'll try not to hang up on you. Carolyn King has a question, so let me see if I can address her question. Carolyn, are you present? Hello? Whoop, I must have hung up on Carolyn as well. Well, let me read down the list a little bit further in terms of some of the questions that have come in. All right, another question that has come in is some folks are asking what kind of evangelism coach resources are on my site that can help with some of this stuff. I do have a store tab at the evangelismcoach.org website, and in that you'll find that I've got a couple of different hospitality products as well as a DVD for greeters. I've got two downloads on hospitality issues. One is creating a vision for hospitality, and that's really aimed at helping to cast that hospitality vision. It's an audio recording. And then I've also got the two hospitality ebooks that many of you have already made purchases of, and so I want to thank you for those purchases. And then I've also got the evangelism course, which I have mentioned to you, and then on top of that, I've also got the Greeter DVD that I recorded back in September. So those are some of the resources that can help you with some of this stuff. The only resource that I have in terms of helping you implement an evangelism strategy is this particular coaching service that I've introduced you to there on the screen. You can read more about it at evangelismcoach.org/deal and see if that is something that fits. See if something that fits for you. Another question is what would be the best resource from me that would be useful for a pastor to teach the congregation in hospitality and personal evangelism? I think the best one is, quite honestly, the Fear-Free Evangelism Course CD set. Listen to those, and you'll see, how personal evangelism can actually be stress-free. And that's part of what I like about it. That's the biggest response that I get from people who hear from it, is that it presents a model of evangelism that is really that is safe for people who are scared of doing evangelism. And then some actually, let's see, what else we got here at this point. I'll take just a couple more minutes. A couple of questions are centered around how can the pastor get more people excited about evangelism. And quite honestly, the best way that I have seen and that has occurred to me as I have done it is that the pastor sets the example in personal evangelism. The pastor is out there teaching people. The pastor is out there meeting people. The pastor is out there getting to know people out in the community who do not belong to the church. The pastor is involved in meeting with people and helping them find faith in Christ. And that begins to come out in sermons. That begins to come out in stories. Also, the pastor can kind of affirm the congregation for example, at these new baptisms. You can tell the congregation, job well done. That this person is standing here in baptism today because so-and-so invited them to church at the point of their spiritual need. They were welcomed by the hospitality team and by the various servants that serve in that ministry. Job well done. And, here is their particular story. They got involved in a small group. Again, job well done. Saints, you did an awesome job, and we're celebrating this baptism today because God has used you to really influence the spiritual destiny of this particular person. And so the pastor has the opportunity to affirm that and lift up that value of evangelism and hospitality at events like that kind of at baptism. And so really, for me, it comes down to that the pastor needs to be involved in personal evangelism themselves so that the congregation can basically imitate what the pastor is doing. Another a twist on that question is, what do you recommend for a pastor who is not interested in evangelism? I would presume that this comes from another, maybe a committee leader, or perhaps a layperson in the congregation who is really kind of fed up with the pastor not really being interested in personal evangelism. Well, quite honestly, there's some tension that's going to be happening there. But I think that while you may not be able to influence a pastor in personal evangelism, there are probably some things that you can do to make sure that you are involved, and figuring out ways that you can appropriately maybe launch your own little evangelism group. And these are people who actually go out and talk with people. I do have an evangelism small group strategy on my website where I talk about gathering a couple of like-minded people together. You spend some time praying, you reflect on Scripture, and then you hold each other accountable to spiritual conversations during the week. You're not studying a book. You're not forever studying something for 6 months, but indeed you're holding each other accountable to having those conversations during the week, and you're debriefing those conversations. I really think that that's one of the greatest tools to get that started. Some questions with regards to evangelism and church planters, and I think the same is true for church planters. I'm actually involved in a church plant myself. You've heard my story there at the beginning. The reality is that we've got to be involved in building those contacts, in building those relationships. We've got to be involved in praying for the lost ourselves. We've got to be involved in helping our growing base to be comfortable sharing their faith. And so we've got to think strategically about how to do that. It's very easy as in a new church plant to wind up getting your focus off on other things such as budgets and some buildings. In my first church plant, we were donated $100,000. We were donated a building, and in the process, I wound up having to renovate a building, which really impacted my ability to do that personal one-on-one evangelism that I hope to do with regards to evangelism. I spent a lot of time focused on the building. If you want a couple of really good books on personal evangelism, particularly for church planters, there's Gary Roremeyer's book on spiritual conversations without being a jerk. That is Spiritual Conversations Without Being a Jerk. And that is really aimed at church planters, but it talks a lot about networking and how to use your time and various networking goals, as well as ways to listen for spiritual thirst in conversations. I actually think that Gary's material complements mine very well, as it fills out what I think is a missing piece in my material when it comes to spiritual thirst. He's got a conversational journey guide that a lot of people have used around the world that's actually very helpful on that information. Well, just one or two more questions. I've got more here than I can handle, but I realize it's getting late on the East Coast. And one of those questions really has to do with how do you bring in young adults when the congregation is older? And that is a conversation all in and of itself. We can have lots of conversations around that particular theme. I've talked with several congregations that have tried, and probably the biggest resistance that they have found is that the group of older adults really needs to get hold of the vision of welcoming new people. And welcoming goes into a lot of directions, not only tolerating young adults coming to their congregation, but also welcoming them into their hearts and homes. There have been congregations that have thought that they were friendly, but the reality is that they're friendly only with themselves. And when it comes time to having to change things to accommodate a younger audience, the older audience is not entirely thrilled. I've seen it happen time and time again. So the real starting place is to start praying through how to cast that vision for the next generation into the heart of the existing congregation. Because that's part of the work of the evangelism is that of the congregational side of it is that the church has to be welcoming to the new people who come into their midst. And that gets into issues of congregational health and vitality and mission vision. It gets into all of those different things that, consultants can spend more time with you on that particular thing and, of course, a whole lot more money to help you do it. But that's kind of the direction that conversation needs to go. Somebody else asked a question here, and this will be the last one that I'll address tonight, is, let's see, suggestions for engaging a multiracial community. What are some suggestions for engaging a multiracial community? I'll tell you, the last two churches that I've been in have been multiracial communities. In fact, I've been a minority in the church for the last two churches that I have served. Really, it comes down to knowing your community and asking God to show you how to minister in it. What is it that your community needs? We really celebrated our diversity. The first church went, by the time I left to accept my next call, we had people from 25 different nationalities that could speak 40 different languages. So there's some diversity there in a multicultural, multiracial environment. In the current church that I serve, there's 8 different nationalities. And just the other night, I celebrated my birthday, and so I got happy birthday sung to me in 3 different languages. So it really is kind of fun to engage a multiracial community. It's quite an experience. But there's all sorts of different things that kind of go into that, but I don't think we really have the time to get into it at depth this evening. Look, folks, this has been great. It's about 10:15 on the East Coast, so for those of you who are in Brazil, I know it's at like 1:15. For those of you who are in England, it's probably pushing 4 o'clock in the morning. For those of you who are in the Philippines, I think you're pushing maybe 11 o'clock in the morning over there. So it is getting pretty late for most of us who are on the East Coast. I do want to thank you all for coming in and being part of this. Thanks for your feedback. Several of you are shooting off thanks for this, thanks for that kind of comments, how this has been helpful for you. In the comment field, if you've got some feedback that you want to give me, just shoot it in the Q&A field or send me an email or something. If you want to take advantage of the offer, you see that it's up there on the screen. There is space available, so you don't have to worry about that. Probably some of you probably need to go check with your committee to see if you want to be involved in that, and I perfectly understand that as well. And so thanks for your feedback and your comments, and I look forward to seeing you on the next Evangelism Coach webinar.